So I'll put it out to you guys, asking what you guys wanted to know from me. It could have been anything to do with astrophotography or me personally or anything like that. So thanks for everyone that got involved, and let's just jump straight into the questions. So first one here is, can I make a video on polar aligning? I can. The only thing with it is though, I do it a very, very basic and old school way. So I still look through the polar scope, and a lot of people here in the Southern Hemisphere find that really, really hard. So that's why I've sort of put it off, because I'm not sure that you're going to get too much out of it by me just saying look through the polar scope and finding octans. What I can do though is suggest a video by Richard Taddy over at Nightscape Images. He uses a few gadgets that he bolts onto his tracking mount and his iPhone and some special apps to help him polar align, and I believe he doesn't even look through the polar scope and can get some really, really long exposures out of his tracking mount. So I highly recommend checking that out. I'll actually link it below so you can go and check that one out. So the next one here is about the difficulty of my new hydrogen alpha workflow, and yep, I'm finding it really, really hard. And it's just like anything, when you do something for the first time or something new, it's going to be hard at the start and it's going to take a lot of time. So that's where I'm currently at. And it may be hard for me because I'm just doing it the wrong way. I'm just like you guys, I just try and figure things out. So that's where I'm at. I'm currently trying to figure out the best way to do it. And for me, I don't know how to do it really, really well. So it's really hard at the moment, but just like anything, the more you do it, the easier it's going to get. So that's why I'm just trying to push through, and hopefully it gets easier and easier. And you know, I'm trying to work on a few different ways to make that workflow a bit more streamlined. So it is hard at the moment, but hopefully it gets easier. So the next one, how and why did I get into astrophotography? And yeah, it was a pretty natural progression. I was sort of into portrait photography and people and, you know, landscape sort of stuff, and I really like traveling around. So traveling around and shooting landscapes was sort of what I enjoyed doing. And me and my wife were on a holiday in Hawaii, and we're in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, and we stayed there until the sun went down so we could see the beautiful glow of that volcano. And I was just taking some long exposures, not thinking anything about the sky, just wanting to expose the foreground right. And when I looked at the images, something fuzzy in the sky, obviously the Milky Way, and I just sort of was looking. And that night I met a couple of guys, and I really wish I knew who they were. And maybe the magic of social media and the internet these days will, you know, reconnect me with them guys and say a big thanks. But they, you know, showed me settings to use and showed me images that they were taking, and I was just absolutely blown away. I could not believe the images you could get with modern cameras, and I just couldn't believe the images they were getting. So they showed me a few settings to use, and that night I took a few more Milky Way images. They were absolutely terrible, but from then on I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to see more. So when I got home, I just went out every night. I didn't even know where the Milky Way was or what it was, how to find it. I would just go outside and point my camera in random directions and just shoot. And that's how it all got started. And from there, it's just same as you guys, down that deep, deep rabbit hole. And I don't think I found the bottom of that rabbit hole yet, but yeah, that's how I got started. And I'm by no means finished. I've got a lot that I want to achieve and a lot more to learn. So yeah, that's how I got into it. So the next question here is about how much overlap to use on Milky Way panoramas. And for me, I still do 50% overlap. And I know there's guys out there that do 40, 30, 20, 15% even. And for me, it's just not worth it. So if I was shooting an epic panorama and the air glow was going crazy, it was super clear and I was getting some amazing images, if I went home and realized that I had a slight missing spot in my panorama, I would be absolutely livid. So, you know, realistically, if you went to a 50% overlap from, say, a 15% overlap, it might only be 2 more images on each row to get it done. So it might only be 6 more total images. And if you use an average of 2-minute shutter speeds, what's that? 4, 8, 10, 12 minutes. That's all it takes to have insurance to guarantee that you're gonna get a panorama that stitches perfectly. So for me, that's insurance enough. So I still do 50% overlap. So the next question I got here is about how to avoid vignetting problems while stitching single images. So the easiest way is to use the profile corrections in Lightroom. So that will get rid of a bit of that vignette for you. The next thing is to use dedicated stitching software that's got the ability to sort of blend each frame together. And currently I'm using PT GUI, and that does a reasonable job of sort of blending those frames together. The next thing you can do is obviously stop your lens down the wider aperture we get, the harder that vignette's going to be. So it's just sort of that trade-off of how wide of an aperture do you want to shoot to let all that light in, and then the trade-off is obviously going to be that vignette. So, you know, that's up to you. And the only other thing you can do is you can shoot flat frames to stack with that image to try and get rid of that vignette. That works. Or if you shoot with enough overlap, say 50% overlap, when you use PT GUI, you can actually go in there while you're stitching the panorama and mask out what you want to mask out. So after using profile corrections in Lightroom, take it into PT GUI, and if you've still got issues with seeing the vignette lines on individual frames, you can go in there and mask out the outside of individual frames to try and get it to blend a bit better. So I have done that in the past and it works pretty well. So the next one is about what filters I use, and up until recently I didn't use any filters. I've never used sort of light pollution filters or anything like that. My main thing was just to go to dark skies. There was no cheating or sort of getting around the fact that there's light pollution there. I would just simply go to a dark sky. And recently I've been using a hydrogen alpha filter, and that's it. So I'm using an Astronomic 12 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter, and that goes on a full spectrum modified camera. So at the moment, that's all the filters I use, and I don't even really know much about filters, to be honest with you, and you know, what's the best settings to use, or you know, the effects of wide angle lenses and wide apertures, you know, using filters. Mine's a clip-in filter, so I don't even know if that's a positive or negative thing, to be honest with you. This is super new to me, and it's super exciting. Like I'm loving going down this rabbit hole of, you know, doing that sort of narrowband imaging. Oh, some people. Do I do wedding photography? No, I don't like people. I just like to go out there, do my own thing, sit in the dark, no time pressures, under the night sky, and just chill out. Have a couple of beers and just enjoy it. So no, I don't do any sort of wedding photography, people photography, any of that sort of stuff. So the next one here is, can you run through troubleshooting of running a twin rig? So yep, I've got the twins here behind me, and to be honest with you, there's been no real troubleshooting to be had. It's a pretty straightforward thing. It's just go and buy two of everything. And obviously you just got to assemble it in a way that stays reasonably balanced and, you know, user friendly, so you can still get to everything. But using the Atoll brackets and, you know, an Arca Swiss bar across the top, it's all been pretty straightforward. It's just make sure both cameras are pointing at exactly the same portion of sky, and that's about it. Press two buttons at the same time instead of one. I'm sure you could do like a remote cable release on a single trigger and trigger both cameras at the same time, but why buy more gear? I already had a bunch of intervalometers, so I just pressed two buttons at the same time instead of one, but that's about it. It's been pretty straightforward. So if you've got a lot of the gear already, have a crack, have a go at it. It's really, really interesting. So the next one here, why do I mainly focus on huge panoramas with long focal lengths? I don't know. I get an idea to shoot something a little bit tighter with a longer focal length than I normally do, and when I get out there and just see the whole arch over me, I just go, nah, I'm gonna shoot a panorama. And I guess nowadays there's a lot of people shooting big panoramas, but in the past there hasn't been a lot of real high resolution panoramas that I could find in the Southern Hemisphere. So for me, it was really, really cool to see people's reactions from the Northern Hemisphere who would actually get to see the bit that they don't get to see. So you can see their minds sort of ticking over and go, oh yeah, we sort of see up to there, and then, oh wow, look at this bit. So that sort of was the really cool thing about shooting really big panoramas. And you know, obviously I could have done it with like a 14mm lens, but as far as the focal length itself goes, I just love zooming in. For me, there's nothing better than looking at a panorama and then having the ability just to keep zooming in, and having a look at all that really, really cool detail. So that's why, I guess. Going forward, I do want to do a little bit more intimate work, especially going down the route of doing some hydrogen alpha. As a full image, social media doesn't do it justice with the resolution. So what I want to do is crop in a little bit more, get a little bit tighter, maybe with an 85mm lens, and just do little sections of the Milky Way, just so people on social media can get a bit better idea of the resolution, opposed to looking at something that's a couple of gigapixels shrunken down onto a little Instagram screen. So stay tuned. There'll be a little bit tighter stuff. So the next one here is about when is the best time to see the Milky Way. So you can see the Milky Way all year round. Obviously we see all different parts of it depending on where we are in our orbit around the sun, but I think this question is mainly about the Milky Way core. That's what most people say when they say the Milky Way, they're referring to the core. So here in the Southern Hemisphere, winter time is the best time to see the Milky Way core. Anywhere from February right through to October, you can see it. And in the middle of winter, if you go out not that far after dark, it'll be directly over your head. So away from that haze and light pollution on the horizons, just look straight up and you'll see that beautiful, beautiful Milky Way core. So middle of winter, get your Ugg boots on, go and have a look. So the next one is about a photo editing tutorial, and yeah, I know a lot of you guys have been asking for that, and all I'll say is I don't actually have, at the moment, a workflow that's the same every single time. I'm still learning every single time I do an image, so I'm suffering hard from the Dunning-Kruger effect at the moment. It seems that the more I learn, the more I realise what I don't know, and what I don't want to do is pass over stuff to you guys that may not be the best way to do something. And there's a lot better people out there to teach you guys about post-production than me, and especially going into hydrogen alpha, narrowband sort of stuff. I am still fumbling around trying to figure out the best way to do it, and there's a lot better people out there than me. People like Jacob Sainer, Nightlife Films, Brave Falls, those sort of guys, they've all got channels, and they do sort of tutorials and those sort of things, Patreon pages to give you access to those sort of things. So those guys are all over it. So I would recommend, if you want to know more about post-production, go to the experts, and that's certainly not me. So the next one is about how many times do I re-level the mount while I'm shooting a track panorama. And it's just basically every couple of images. So depends what shutter speed I'm using, but at the moment I'm shooting about 2-minute shutter speed, so maybe every like 3 images, 2 or 3 images. It doesn't really matter, it's not that important. So every 2 or 3 minutes, 2 or 3 images, which should be 4, 6 minutes, even 8 minutes, just re-level it up. So, you know, it might be 4, 5, 6 times throughout a panorama. Obviously all that depends on focal lengths and all those sort of things, but yeah, every couple of minutes I just re-level it up and go again. So will I show some of my first astro images? It's a great motivation for everyone to see how far someone can go. Yep, brace yourselves, here they come. So these are some of my first images, and what you can see is I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and that's fine because I didn't know anything. So what you'll see is pretty much everything's out of focus, exposure's terrible, post-production's terrible, and here we can see one of my first panoramas, and it's terrible, bit of light painting. Out of focus, stitching problems, all sorts of stuff. But at the time, I thought it was absolutely incredible what I could capture with my camera. So these are my first images, and yeah, I'm proof in the pudding that anything's possible. And if you just commit yourself and go out on cold, dark, lonely nights a lot, and commit yourself, you can progress pretty quickly, actually. So the next question here is about, I mentioned snakes so casually. Have I ever encountered any danger from wildlife or people? So people, no, I think I'm the scariest thing out in the dark, so I don't really worry about people. And to be fair, that when you're out in the dark, obviously all your lights are off, so you can be shooting the night sky. So if anyone was coming from kilometres around you, you would see them. They'd have their phone light on, car lights, torches, whatever. So you would see people coming from an absolute mile away. So you don't have to worry about people, they're not going to bother you. As for wildlife, I do mention snakes pretty casually, but I do actually take safety pretty seriously. You guys see me wandering around in pluggers or flip-flops, whatever you want to call them, out in the scrub. But I do actually take it seriously. I do pack all the first aid sort of stuff with me. I do travel remote and I do travel on my own. So I carry a snake bite kit, first aid kit that are both portable, so if I'm away from the car, that can be in my bag, and also carry a really, really significant first aid kit that stays in the car that's got all sorts of stuff, everything from antibiotics if I'm away remote and I get crook, eye wash, eye drops, all sorts of wound care, cleaning stuff, all the way down to the car itself carries 60 litres of fresh water. I've got 240 volt power in the car as well. And down to communication, so I'm always using satellite communication if I'm away from mobile phone service. So checking in with people at certain times, letting people know where you're going to be at what time, and then when they can expect to hear from you again, so that if they don't, they can raise the alarm. And also having satellite communication gives you the ability to, you know, if shit absolutely hits the fan, you can hit the hit the big red button and the cavalry will come and get you. So it might seem like I'm pretty blasé about safety, but I do take it extremely seriously. So the next one here is about what is the process for calculating how efficient you can be with not taking extra panels. So you can work it out with the Planet app, which I've showed before, but it's not actually perfect. The best way to go about this is just experience. So when I first started shooting, I would work it out. You know, when I first started shooting panoramas years ago, I would actually work it out, you know, really meticulously so that I had everything worked out fine. But now I just know that at 40mm, it's going to take this amount of images in this amount of time. At 85, it's going to be this, and 20mm, it's going to be this. You just get used to it, and it's just an experience thing. It'd be no different to, you know, getting used to using a camera in manual mode or anything like that. But that's all I can say is go and get some experience in doing it. And very basically, you can figure out roughly how long things are going to take with a given lens. If you go out in the daytime and just say you want to shoot 180 degrees, just set up your camera in the daytime and just count how many images it takes to go 180 degrees with a 50% overlap. And that tells you how many images you need per row. And then depending on how high the Milky Way is in the sky, it'll just tell you how many rows high you need to go. So you may only need 2 rows and it may only be 5 or 6 images across. There you go, there you know. And you can just simply work out exposure times from then. All I can say is just when you work out all your exposure times, just allow time in between each frame to fiddle around with the camera, check your focus, all those sort of things. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So the next question is about how I attach the twin cameras or pretty much any sort of camera to a panorama setup and how that attaches to the tracker. So what you'll see is pretty much all Skywatcher trackers use a Vixen Dove style plate, and that just attaches whatever you want to attach to the tracker itself. So that can be a declination bracket or just a ball head adapter, which should come in the kit, whichever kit you buy. And simply on top of that, we need to get a level base. So I use a mix of the Alan Wallace Z plate or a ball head if I need to carry a lot more weight. So I just get a really sturdy ball head to carry that load and give me that level base. And simply on top of that goes an indexing panorama head. Now it doesn't matter what sort of indexing panorama head you use. I just use a cheap one, which was an Amazon one, and it works really well. So the only important things is that you can change the increments of the indexes on that panorama head so that if you want to change focal lengths, you can change that pin and change the set point for the panorama. And simply on top of that is a 2-way head just to get, you know, up and down axis. And if you're going to go down the route of a twin camera setup, simply on top of that 2-way head, I've just got a 300mm long Arca Swiss plate, bar, whatever you want to call it, and that's what I hang the cameras off. So it's pretty straightforward stuff, and I can see how people get confused when it's all assembled together. You can't sort of see what bit's what. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So next question is, how much effort do I put into leveling the tripod, and do you think this is important? And when tracking, do you level the rig after every exposure due to the rotation? So I think what you're talking about there is when people talk about tracking mounts and setting them up, they say make sure your tripod's dead level, and that's the way I do it. I'm reasonably accurate with it, and it's only for the pure fact is so that when I dial in the latitude base, it's actually at the right angle. So what you can imagine is if your tripod's actually laying back a little bit, when you go and set your latitude on that latitude base, it's not actually pointing at the right latitude, and it can make it hard when you do polar alignment. So if you level your tripod out perfectly and you set that latitude base to your current latitude, you know that all you need to do is move left and right. You don't have to actually search up and down for octans or Polaris. It'll be somewhere left or right. So that's why I do it. And as far as re-leveling the mount while I'm shooting, I've already covered that. So every 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, it doesn't really matter. It's not that important. And the wider the angle of the lens, it doesn't really matter at all, because you can just blaze through that panorama so quick that it doesn't really matter that much. So the next one here is talking about stitching issues in PT GUI, and it's a really hard thing to sort of comment on without seeing what's actually happening in the stitching software for your particular image, Derek. And all I can say is when you do stitch panoramas for a tracked image, when you're doing the sky portion, you may have a little bit of foreground that's in there. Make sure the control points for PT GUI are actually in the sky, not the foreground, because obviously the camera's moving up and down and rotating around as you're re-leveling it and it's tracking all those sort of things. The foreground's going to be all stepped, and if it's trying to use part of the foreground as a control point or use that as a point to align two images, the sky's going to be all twisted and it just won't work. So yeah, make sure when you're stitching the sky portion, all your control points are in the sky. And when you go to stitch the foreground portion of your image, make sure all the control points are in the foreground and not in the sky. That's all I can really say without actually seeing what's going on, yeah, with your image in particular. So that's it. That's all the questions I had. And even if you guys didn't submit questions, hopefully some of those questions were pretty relevant to you and you got something out of it. If you like this style of content, just kicking back and talking astro and things like that, let me know. Feel free to ask questions, and if you like this style of content, I'll talk about them in another video. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, until next time, cheers guys.